Okay, hey, welcome to another episode of On the Wrist from Off the Cuff. Today we have a really cool episode for you, brought to you in part by Belmont Watches. Thank you very much to the team over there for lending in this gorgeous Omega. A little bit about the brand Omega. They were founded back in 1848. They are Swiss made and they fall within the Swatch Group's luxury tier. Now, although they are part of the Swatch Group, I would say that them actually merging with Tissot was a precursor to what eventually became known as a Swatch Group. So I'd say that their history is a touch more pure than other brands within the group, such as, let's say, like Longines, Rado, or Hamilton, right, who were more so acquisitions and kind of saved by the group versus being one of the founding members of the group. Now, in terms of the type of watch, this is a dive watch, so keen common characteristics and design, which you're looking for a diver. Of course, you're going to want water resistance, typically with some type of screw down crown. You're going to want something that's tough, legible, with a dive time bezel, and a dive extension is always nice if on bracelet. This is a very special Seamaster 300. It's in the 39 millimeter size, and it's part of the 1957 Trilogy release. And this thing's pretty sweet. It was originally released in 2017, and it's a 60th anniversary tribute to one of the 3 classic timepieces released in 1957. This Seamaster 300, limited to 3,557 pieces, is based on the CK2913 and retains that NIDE signed on the crown, which back in 57 was the mark of the watch's exceptional water resistance, as well as the 1957 seahorse on the case back. These are actually all sold out, but you can buy this pre-owned from Belmont Watches for $6,200, which is quite a deal when you consider the rarity of this piece and what it represents as really a true-to-form reissue of, a very historically significant watch. So with all that said, let's go ahead, zoom the camera out, get this piece in hand, and take a closer look. Okay, guys, so what you're going to see here, of course, is an outstanding example of this particular watch, as well as it coming with the full kit, and I mean down to the extra spring bars inside of this really cool Omega branded tool here. So if you shake it up, you hear a little noise and you go, hey, I wonder what that is, right? If I can get it to focus on the brand name, there you go. You open this up and you have some really, really nice spring bars in there, like some of the nicest spring bars I've ever seen. And that probably makes sense that they would be included within this very luxurious package. You also get the additional straps. You actually get the whole kit. I can't fit it all on camera here though, but it is very cool. You can see you're going to get straps, and although this does, spoiler alert, this has 19 millimeter lugs, the nice thing is you already get really nice 19 millimeter options here, beautifully signed, and like, look at this, these are gorgeous. And then it even still has the blue tape on it, so that is pretty outstanding. So very, very nice. But let's get to the main event here. Look at this with that beautifully kind of faded, they say this has a tropical style dial, meaning that it does try to incorporate that faded kind of matte black look to where it's not just quite a simple matte black, to where it almost has kind of a bit of an anthracite gray to it, because it has been weathered so much, right? At least in look. So this actually has some very interesting measurements, and of course, I know from a marketing perspective, they want to be able to sell everything by searchable dimensions, but taking the caliper to this case, it's actually 38 millimeters at the case, and then about 38.8 millimeters at the bezel. So I thought that was interesting, and I think it's fair to say, hey, we'll market it as a 39 millimeter. But for those of you that might feel like this is a little large because of the 48 millimeter lug to lug, just know that this does have a very, very compact case. Also, it has a 14 0.2 millimeter thickness, and it is nicely broken down by the compartmentalization of each of the features, from the sapphire crystal down to the bezel to the mid case, and then of course to the case back, which has the sticker on it there. I don't want to mess with that, but you can see the original seahorse there, which is very, very cool. So getting into this crystal, wow, look at that. You can see the Omega symbol there. And it is very, very clean, very legible. You can see even at very harsh angles, it has that box dome style sapphire, double dome with kind of a boxed edge to it there, which I think has a beautiful shape to it and flows very organically. Now, here's another special feature here specific to this model, which is the fact that they reincorporated the bidirectional rotation on it. It does have 120 clicks, though. And I will say it doesn't necessarily feel equal one direction versus the other. I think it actually has two different personalities in terms of when you're spinning it this way versus the opposite way, which is, I'm sure, down to the way they constructed it. But and a little tough with the gloves here, but this has so many polished surfaces on it. I just figured I'd save you guys you know, all the off-camera wipe down hijinks that I normally will have to do, just because you know, I don't like to have stuff super fingerprinty on camera. The crown is signed, and at 3 o'clock here, if I can get it to focus, there you go. And you can see it also has that extra little moniker there inside of the Omega symbol. Again, very, very traditional, dating back to the original model. Now, inside here, although you can't see the movement, it is one of Omega's 8806 movements, which is master chronometer certified, METIS certified. So it's going to be 0 to +6 seconds a day. Yes. So there'll be no losing time. It's just going to be a 6-second window from 0, which is right on, to +6. And of course, this is a loaner, so I haven't been wearing it or anything like that, so I can't tell you exactly what it's rated at, but it is nice that this, of course, is a master chronometer. One thing that I feel like doesn't get brought up enough about these movements, though, is that they do beat at a very particular beat rate. This does have a 55-hour power reserve, which isn't terrible, but it also isn't class leading. It's just, you know, it's kind of there, which is good. You know, typically the standard would be somewhere around a 38, so 55 isn't bad at all. But this does have a ton of anti-magnetic properties, which means that it's actually anti-magnetic up to 15,000 Gauss, which is really, really strong. And then in terms of its beat rate, it actually beats at 3.5 hertz, right? The standard beat rate would be 4 hertz, which would be 8 ticks per second. And you know, would be that 28,800 vibrations per hour. This is going to beat at 25,200 vibrations per hour, so it's going to be slightly smoother than you know, some of the Powermatic movements that have been slowed down to 3 hertz, but not quite the smooth 4 hertz sweep that you might be accustomed to within kind of Swiss watch luxury, right? Not a high beat by any means, right? That would be another step, which is 10 ticks per second, or 5 hertz. So the standard is typically around 4. Anything below that would be, you know, kind of low beat. Anything above that, high beat. This being just a notch, half a notch underneath, right? So I think, you know, they kind of get a pass a lot of the times. But you can see now that a lot of manufacturers are slowing down the beat rate and then elongating those power reserves as kind of, you know, kind of a new direction, which, you know, is led in part by the Swatch Group. So it would make sense that some of that is, of course, in the same path that Omega is on. Now, getting into the dial here, guys, you have this beautiful matte black tropic faded dial that's all painted. The hour indexes are actually recessed, though, and lume filled, so they do have a bit of dimension to them, which I think is really nice. This is, of course, a no-date model. This uses old radium style loom, so this is going to have that nice kind of warm patina tint to it. And I would say that one of the companies that actually have really done this whole patina loom right is probably Omega. They've been kind of they've stuck to their guns on it, and they really have embraced that custardy, faux Tina look, beyond just trying to make it look aged, to where it actually is just a beautiful balance of color play in general there. The nice thing is, although it does have that old school look, you're getting new school, build quality. So that 300, you are really getting 30 bar, 300 meters or 1,000 feet of water resistance. The lugs here are 19 millimeters. The bracelet is a nice 3-link with brushed center links and polished outer links. And everything is solid, of course, like you would expect. Solid end links, solid links. These are all actually individual 3-link pieces there. And it actually does have a very gradual and mild taper. Some people might look at this and go, oh, it's a non-tapering bracelet, but it does taper slightly, ever so slightly, 1 millimeter down to 18 millimeters. So 19 millimeters at the lug, 18 down here. And basically these first 3 have a very, very slight taper to them, which equate to a millimeter of taper there. The clasp itself is beautifully done, fully milled. It's a 21 millimeter width on it, nicely signed, of course, really reminiscent of the old school style, but you're getting everything modern, fully milled. You're even getting this beautiful toolless micro adjust here, so you can get this to fit your wrist really to any comfort level. Another nice thing is that these links are all relatively short in general. I mean, on some bracelets these would be considered half links, so you're gonna be able to get that nice fit. And then you'll also have a little bit of extra room, of course. Here you can see that extension, so that if you do tend to have some wrist swelling or something like that, you're going to get a good amount of adjustability there. And this actually has all of the links added in. I didn't mess with them just because it's such a nice piece. I just figured don't want to risk messing anything up on here. It is really quite gorgeous, and it flows. Look at the articulation on there. It's just really gorgeous. So with that said, let's actually get it on the wrist and see how it wears. Okay guys, as you can see on my 7.5-inch wrist, this thing wears really, really beautifully. And yes, it's not super thin, but 14.2 millimeters. It's shaped like a dive watch. It's got a little bubble on there, and it is good looking. My gosh, the way that they did the brushing and polishing is definitely luxury level. If I get my wrist up too close to the camera, of course, you're going to get a bit of lens distortion. So what I'll do is I'll keep my wrist nice and low and just tighten up the shot here, so you guys can get still a detailed look of how this will lay on the wrist, but just at a bit of a truer aspect ratio. You can see it sits very nicely on the wrist, and although there's some extra links in here, you can see how big it is even on my 7.5-inch wrist. So even if you have a larger wrist, you're going to be good to go. And of course, you have a smaller wrist, again, good to go, because you can just remove these links there. So very, very handsome, guys. Look at the way that it just drapes around the wrist. There's a very gradual slope to those lugs, but it really does the job, and it helps visually appear very, very thin because of the way that they really segmented the visual weight of the bezel, the crystal, the case back, and really kind of narrow in on that mid case just being super svelte, super thin, and again hugging the wrist just beautifully. So with that said, let's go ahead, get this piece off the wrist, set up for some loom shots, low light transition, and closing thoughts. Okay, let's go ahead and hit the lights here. Yes, look at that loom. That is potent, well applied loom. Very, very nice. and you can see there's still a little bit of ambient light coming in through the curtains there. But one thing I always like to work in, of course, is going to be a bit of low light transition, because you're not always going to be out in the middle of a field enjoying direct sunlight. A lot of times you're going to find yourself coming in and out of buildings, walking underneath overhangs, or maybe just hanging out underneath the shade of a tree. So it's nice to see what these colors, textures, and finishes render like in less than optimal lighting, to maybe even include some harsh lighting that typically could expose any type of factory defects there. You might see, a little debris there underneath the crystal or something like that. But generally what you're going to see is just, a little wear and tear there that normally would probably have been washed out, which you wouldn't have seen. You can see the brushing there. This is a worn piece, and it should be worn, especially in this style. I mean, you guys saw how immaculate it looked in that really nice studio lighting. It's going to look just like that on your wrist. So there are going to be, of course, a couple of marks. This is pre-owned, but man, what an amazing example. Look at that lume. So legible there, guys. Even if you think about the fact that you can actually read the 12369 on the dial, through most lighting conditions, you're still going to see that contrast of white over black, and it is very, very nice. And then of course you're going to see the way that the dial plays, that aluminum bezel insert, very old school but still very inky and black. Really well executed there. It doesn't have that kind of cheapness that you've seen on some other aluminum inserts, where the anodization just looks a bit tinny and glossy, overly glossy, I should say. Here it has more of a deeper kind of, again, inkier vibe to it, and it's very, very nice. So, closing thoughts, guys, on the wrist. Wow, it has such a standout special feel. It genuinely feels like a portal to the past on your wrist, and it just does. I mean, there is a difference between having that vintage look and then actually recreating that and kind of transporting you there. And that's what this watch does. It really does transport you to a simpler time, back when really these types of dive watches were so cutting edge. I mean, back in 1957, guys, just a note, Seiko didn't have its first dive watch, the 62 MAS, until 1965. So these guys were really knee deep within this space. I mean, they actually even had water resistant models that didn't look anything like a dive watch, but some might argue that those dive watches, water sports oriented watches, predates even Blancpain, right? And of course Rolex. So Omega has always kind of been a leader within that space. In terms of model variants, guys, there aren't really any. This of course is part of that trilogy, but there are other vintage inspired Seamaster 300s. This is not just vintage inspired, this is a vintage reissue, right? So it's very true to form. Of course, while adding a lot of modern niceties. So I think they did a really good job kind of balancing old and new here. Now, in terms of comparable models, yeah, the vintage Big Crown divers space have been pretty much all the rage. Even before the Tudor Black Bay, which took it to a whole nother stratosphere. But as a faithful reissue of a historical brand's first diver, I'd say you could probably compare this to something like Seiko's SLA 017 62 MAS, which was limited to 2,000 pieces, but it was also a reissue, right? It was definitely less of a reimagining and more of a true to form reissue that celebrated, that original diver. And those are quite collectible. This is also, I'm sure, quite collectible, and I'm blown away at the price point, $6,200. Like that's nice. I tell you what, my SLA 017, it wasn't quite that much, but it wasn't that far off, to be perfectly honest. It was, they have appreciated quite a bit. So I guess that's one of the benefits of Omega is you know, that this space is quite saturated. They offer so many options, especially within the Seamaster line. It does help with accessibility, even for something this limited, which I think is cool. And it's only a matter of a time, honestly, before these just start becoming super scarce. And the harder they are to find in like new condition or well-worn condition, you know, the more prices are going to really skyrocket for examples like this that are just really, really pristine. So bottom line, with it, you know, again, with as saturated as the Seamaster line is today, and really kind of has always been, even if you look back historically, it's really great to see a standout model that feels like one of the definitive iterations of this legendary dive watch. And that, again, this has that feeling of this is the one. This is the one to have, right? There are other Seamasters that are really fun and are great, and are quite desirable, but I definitely feel like this has that weight where like this is the Seamaster to have. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. If you like the video, please do a like, and if you haven't already, please subscribe for more content just like this. Thanks, guys.